The gunshot echoed through the ravine as Nora Davenport clutched her bleeding side, stumbling forward through the rugged Montana wilderness. The year was 1876, and everything she had built over the past 5 years had crumbled in a single night. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit had finally faded, but she knew they wouldn't stop searching, not when she carried the evidence that could hang the most powerful man in Butte. Blood seeped through her fingers as she pressed against her wound, the pain searing through her body with each labored step. The summer heat bore down mercilessly, dust clinging to her sweat-drenched skin as she pushed forward. Her once fine dress, now torn and stained, caught on scrub brush and rocks as she navigated the unforgiving terrain. "Just a little further," she whispered to herself, her throat parched from thirst and fear. The distant sound of running water gave her hope, and she changed course, following the faint noise until she reached a narrow creek. Falling to her knees, she drank desperately, the cool water bringing momentary relief before she tore a strip from her petticoat to clean and bind her wound. As she worked, her thoughts returned to the documents hidden in the small pouch sewn into her corset ledgers detailing the corruption that had cost her father his life. Judge Wallace had made it clear what would happen if she didn't surrender them. The bullet that grazed her side was merely his first warning. Nora had nearly finished binding her wound when she heard the distinctive sound of approaching hoofbeats. Panic seized her as she scrambled to her feet, searching frantically for somewhere to hide. But the open terrain offered little cover and her strength was failing her. The rider appeared at the top of the ridge, silhouetted against the setting sun. A tall figure on horseback, hat pulled low, rifle resting across his lap. For a moment, Nora considered throwing herself back into the creek, hoping the current might carry her to safety, but she knew it was too shallow. Instead, she grabbed a jagged rock, holding it behind her back as the rider approached. If this was one of Wallace's men, she wouldn't go quietly. "Madam," the man's voice carried across the distance between them, deep but cautious. "You're bleeding." Nora tightened her grip on the rock. "Stay back." The rider slowed his horse, raising his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. "I'm not looking for trouble. Just passing through and saw you were hurt." As he drew closer, Nora could make out his features, a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard, eyes sharp and assessing beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson. His clothes were dust-covered but of good quality, a rancher perhaps, rather than one of Wallace's hired guns. "What's your name?" she demanded, keeping the rock hidden but ready. "Quentin Tanner," he answered, his gaze flickering to the makeshift bandage at her side. "I've got a cabin about 3 miles north of here. You need medical attention." "I'm fine," she insisted, though her legs trembled beneath her. Quentin dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "You're about to collapse, madam. Whatever trouble you're in, bleeding to death won't solve it." "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," he admitted with surprising frankness. "But I reckon your options are limited at the moment." A wave of dizziness washed over Nora, and she staggered slightly. The rock slipped from her fingers as she reached out to steady herself against a nearby boulder. Quentin moved forward quickly but carefully. "I'm going to help you onto my horse. If you feel the need to hit me with that rock you were holding, I'd appreciate you waiting until after we reach shelter." Despite herself, a small, hysterical laugh escaped Nora's lips. "You saw that." "I've learned to notice when folks are planning to brain me," he replied with the ghost of a smile. "Makes life less surprising." As he helped her onto his horse, Nora's vision swam. The last thing she remembered was the feeling of strong arms steadying her as darkness closed in. When Nora awoke, she was lying on a narrow bed in a simple but clean cabin. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, and the scent of coffee hung in the air. She tried to sit up, then gasped as pain shot through her side. "Careful now," came Quentin's voice from across the room. "That wound needs time to heal." Nora's hand flew to her side, finding fresh bandages. Panic seized her as she realized her clothes had been changed. She wore a man's shirt far too large for her frame. "My things? Your dress was ruined," Quentin explained, approaching with a cup of coffee. "I did what I could for your wound, then gave you something to wear. Your personal items are there." He nodded toward a chair where her corset and other garments were carefully folded. Relief washed over her as she felt the small pouch still sewn into the corset. The documents were safe. "Thank you," she said cautiously, accepting the coffee. "How long was I unconscious?" "About 14 hours," he answered, pulling a chair near the bed but maintaining a respectful distance. "You had a fever for a while. I was getting worried." Nora studied him in the firelight. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. His hands were calloused but had been gentle when tending her wound. "You said your name is Quentin Tanner?" she asked. He nodded. "Most folks call me Quinn." "And you are?" She hesitated only briefly. Nora Davenport." "Well, Miss Davenport, I don't make it a habit to pry, but bullet wounds generally come with stories attached. Anything I should be worried about? Anyone coming after you?" Nora lowered her gaze to the steaming coffee. "It would be better if you didn't know." "Fair enough," he conceded. "But if men with guns show up at my door, I'd prefer some warning." She looked up sharply. "If that happens, I'll be gone before they arrive. I won't bring trouble to your door." Quinn studied her face for a long moment. "You're running from something serious, aren't you?" "I can leave in the morning," Nora said, avoiding the question. "With that wound, you'd make it half a mile before collapsing." Quinn shook his head. "Stay until you're stronger. This place is remote, few people even know it exists." "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked, suspicious. "My father taught me never to turn away someone in need," he answered simply. "Besides, I've been on the wrong side of a gun myself. Know what it's like to need shelter when the world's turned against you." Something in his tone made Nora believe him. Still, she couldn't afford to trust too easily, not when Judge Wallace's men could be searching for her. "1 week," she agreed finally. "Then I need to move on." Quinn nodded. "A week it is. Now try to get some more rest. I've got stew cooking that'll be ready when you wake." As he moved away, Nora called out softly, "Mr. Tanner." He turned back. "Quinn, please." "Quinn, thank you." A small smile touched his lips. "You're welcome, Miss Davenport." "Nora," she corrected. "Nora," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "Rest well." True to his word, Quinn asked no more questions about her past over the next few days. He kept busy with work around the cabin and tending to his small herd of cattle, returning regularly to check on her wound and bring her meals. By the 3rd day, Nora was strong enough to sit at the table rather than eat in bed, and by the 5th, she insisted on helping with simple chores. "You should be resting," Quinn admonished as he found her sweeping the cabin floor one morning. "I've never been good at sitting idle," Nora replied. "Besides, it's the least I can do to repay your kindness." Quinn had been out since dawn, repairing a section of fence that had been damaged during a recent storm. His shirt was damp with sweat, his forearms tanned and muscled from years of hard work. "No repayment necessary," he said, washing his hands in a basin by the door. "But if you're determined to keep busy, I won't stop you. Just don't overdo it." As they settled into a routine, Nora found herself watching Quinn when he wasn't looking. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness she hadn't known was missing in her life. When he thought she was sleeping, she sometimes caught him looking at her too, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. On the 6th night, As they sat before the fire after supper, Quinn broke their unspoken agreement not to discuss her situation. "Tomorrow makes a week," he said quietly. Nora tensed. "Yes, your wound is healing, but you're not strong enough for hard travel yet." "I can manage," she insisted. Quinn set aside the knife he'd been sharpening. "Before you decide, there's something I should tell you. Rode into town for supplies yesterday while you were resting. There are wanted posters up with your name on them." Nora's blood ran cold. "What do they say?" "That you're wanted for theft and the murder of a man named Harold Davenport." Quinn's eyes held hers steadily. "Your father, I'm guessing." Her hands trembled as she set down her cup. "I didn't kill him. Judge Wallace did, or had it done, at least. My father discovered the judge was embezzling from the mine investors and confronted him privately. The next day, they found my father's body in his office, and Wallace claimed I'd been seen fleeing the scene. And the theft?" "Documents," Nora admitted. "Ledgers proving Wallace's crimes. My father had collected evidence for months. After his murder, I took them from his safe before Wallace's men could destroy them." Quinn nodded slowly. "I figured it was something like that. Wallace has half the county in his pocket." "Including the sheriff." "You believe me?" Nora asked, surprised. "Wallace has a reputation even out here. Too many people have lost land or lives crossing him." Quinn leaned forward. "The posters offer $500 for information leading to your capture." "That's a lot of money in these parts." "All the more reason I should leave," Nora said, rising from her chair. "I've stayed too long already." Quinn stood as well. "Or all the more reason you need help. $500 will have every desperate soul for 50 miles looking for you." "I won't involve you in this," she insisted. "You've done enough." "I'm already involved," he countered. "And I know these mountains better than any of Wallace's men. There's a place higher up, an old mining cabin my father built years ago. No one remembers it exists. You'd be safe there while we figure out what to do about those documents." Nora stared at him, conflicted. "Why would you risk this for me? You barely know me." Quinn was silent for a moment, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting hers again. "Maybe I've been alone too long out here. Or maybe I just can't stand by and watch Wallace destroy another life." He took a step closer. "But I think it's simpler than that. I believe you, Nora, and I want to help." The sincerity in his voice moved something within her, something she'd thought died with her father. For 5 years, she'd carried the weight of survival alone, trusting no one. "If I stay," she said carefully, "and if Wallace's men find us, they won't just arrest me. They'll kill anyone who helped me." Quinn's expression didn't change. "I'm aware of the risk. And you're still offering to help." "I am." Nora took a deep breath, knowing this decision could change everything. "Then I accept. But we do this carefully, and at the first sign of danger to you, I leave. That's non-negotiable." The corner of Quinn's mouth lifted slightly. "Noted. We'll head to the higher cabin tomorrow at dawn." They left before first light, Quinn leading the way on horseback with Nora riding behind him. The summer morning was cool at this elevation, mist clinging to the pines as they climbed higher into the mountains. Quinn had packed supplies to last 2 weeks: flour, coffee, beans, and dried meat, along with ammunition for his rifle and revolver. "It's another hour to the cabin," Quinn told her as they paused to rest the horse. "Rough terrain ahead, but that works in our favor. Hard to follow tracks up here." Nora nodded, scanning the forest around them. The vastness of the Montana wilderness was both comforting and intimidating, miles of untamed country where a person could disappear, but also where survival demanded constant vigilance. "You grew up here?" she asked, accepting the canteen he offered. "Born in Illinois," Quinn replied. "My father brought us west after my mother died. I was 12. He was looking for silver like everyone else. Found enough to buy land instead of chasing dreams in the mines. Smart man, my father. And your family now. Quinn took back the canteen, his fingers brushing hers briefly. Don't have one. Father passed 3 years ago. No siblings. What about you? Besides your father? No one, Nora answered. My mother died when I was small. It was just father and me and Butt. He was an accountant for several mining operations. That's how he discovered Wallace's theft, Nora nodded. He noticed discrepancies in the books, spent months gathering proof before he confronted Wallace. Her voice tightened. I told him it was dangerous, but he believed in justice. Said no man should be above the law. He sounds like a good man, Quinn said softly. He was the best of men, Nora agreed, blinking back tears. And I won't let his death mean nothing. Those documents will expose Wallace for what he is. Quinn helped her back onto the horse. Then we'll make sure they reach the right hands. The territorial governor has no love for Wallace. If we can get the evidence to him directly, he'd act on it. The governor is in Helena, Nora said. Over 100 miles from here. One step at a time, Quinn advised. First, we get you somewhere safe. Then we plan our next move. The mining cabin was smaller than Quinn's main homestead but sturdily built, nestled in a clearing surrounded by thick forest. A small creek bubbled nearby, providing fresh water. Inside was a single room containing a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a bed wide enough for one person to sleep comfortably. It's not much, Quinn said as he lit a fire in the hearth, but it's defendable. Only one approach unless someone knows these mountains as well as I do. Nora moved to the single window, looking out at the wilderness stretching before her. It's perfect, thank you. Over the next few days, they settled into a new routine. Quinn taught Nora how to use his spare revolver, setting up targets behind the cabin. She was a quick study, her hands steady despite the gravity of their situation. My father believed women should know how to protect themselves, she explained when Quinn expressed surprise at how quickly she mastered the weapon. He taught me to shoot when I was 16. In the evenings, they sat before the fire planning their journey to Helena. Quinn had maps of the territory and knowledge of routes that avoided main roads and settlements where Wallace might have influence. We could take the northern trail through the pass, he suggested one night, tracing the route on the map spread between them. Adds distance, but keeps us away from towns until we're well out of Wallace's reach. Nora leaned closer to study the map, her shoulder brushing against his. How long would it take? 10 days, maybe 12, depending on weather and if we're being followed. She nodded, her face illuminated by the firelight. And once in Helena, how do we reach the governor? I know a man there, James Hollister, fought with my father in the war. He works in the governor's office now. Quinn's fingers traced another line on the map. He could arrange a meeting. As they talked, Nora became increasingly aware of Quinn's proximity. In the small cabin, they existed in a bubble separate from the world and its dangers. She found herself noticing things about him, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the gentle way he treated his horse, how he always made sure she ate before taking food for himself. One morning, as Nora stepped outside to collect water from the creek, she spotted Quinn chopping wood a short distance away. He'd removed his shirt in the summer heat, and she paused, bucket in hand, watching the play of muscles across his back as he worked. Something stirred within her, a feeling she hadn't expected and wasn't sure how to address. When Quinn turned and saw her standing there, he offered a slight smile. Need help with that bucket? Embarrassed at being caught staring, Nora shook her head. No, I can manage. The wound barely hurts now. He nodded, setting down the axe and reaching for his shirt. Good. You're healing well. That evening, as they prepared a simple supper together in the confined space of the cabin, the air between them seemed charged with unspoken thoughts. Their hands touched as Nora passed Quinn a plate and neither pulled away immediately. "Quinn," she said softly, meeting his gaze, "I don't know how to thank you for all you've done." His eyes held hers steadily. "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. You've risked everything for a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore, Nora," he said, his voice low. Before she could respond, a sound outside the cabin made them both freeze, the distant crack of a branch breaking under weight. Quinn immediately extinguished the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness save for the glow of the fire. "Get down," he whispered, reaching for his rifle. Nora ducked beneath the window, heart pounding as Quinn moved silently to peer through a crack in the shutters. For several tense minutes, they remained motionless, listening. Then came another sound, the unmistakable whinny of a horse. "Someone's out there," Quinn breathed, his body tense beside hers in the darkness. "Wallace's men," Nora whispered back. "Maybe, or could be a hunter." Quinn checked his rifle. "Stay here. I'm going to circle around, see what we're dealing with." "No," Nora gripped his arm. "It's too dangerous." "Better to know than be surprised," he insisted. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes, there's a loose floorboard under the bed with emergency supplies and a map. Head north and don't stop until you reach the river." Before she could protest further, he slipped out the back door and disappeared into the darkness. The minutes crawled by as Nora waited, revolver in hand, straining to hear any sound from outside. When 15 minutes had passed with no sign of Quinn, she began to prepare herself to flee. She retrieved the documents from her corset and secured them in a small waterproof pouch Quinn had given her. Just as she was checking the loose floorboard he'd mentioned, the back door opened. She spun around, gun raised, only to lower it in relief as Quinn stepped inside. "It's all right," he said quickly, seeing her alarm. "Just a trapper setting lines. He's camped about half a mile east. You're sure he's not one of Wallace's men? Old man named Peterson. Known him for years." Quinn secured the door behind him. "But it's a reminder we can't stay here much longer. If a trapper can find his way this close, others might too." Nora nodded, the brief moment of terror giving way to determination. "Then we leave for Helena. Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Quinn agreed. That night, as they prepared to sleep, Quinn on a bedroll near the fire, Nora on the narrow bed, neither found rest easily. The close call had heightened their awareness of time slipping away and dangers drawing nearer. "Quinn," Nora's voice came softly through the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes," he answered. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not just for myself, for you, for what might happen if we fail." The floorboards creaked as Quinn sat up. "Fear's natural when the stakes are high, but we've got a solid plan and determination on our side. And if that's not enough—" In the dim light from the banked fire, she saw him consider her question carefully. "Then we adjust and keep fighting. That's all any of us can do." His simple certainty comforted her more than elaborate reassurances would have. "Thank you for not dismissing my fears." "They're valid concerns," Quinn replied. "I'd be worried if you weren't afraid. Shows you understand what we're up against." Nora sat up in the bed, drawing her knees to her chest. "When this is over, if we succeed, what will you do?" Quinn was quiet for a moment. "Return to my ranch. Continue the work my father started." "Alone?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. Even in the low light, she could see his eyes find hers across the room. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether I'm still alone when this is over," he said quietly. The implication hung in the air between them, neither willing to speak it more plainly. Both aware of how their lives had become intertwined in ways neither had anticipated. "We should rest," Nora said finally, her voice barely audible. "Long journey tomorrow." "Yes," Quinn agreed, though he made no move to lie back down. "Nora." "Yes." "Whatever happens," he said, I don't regret helping you, not for a moment. In the safety of darkness, Nora allowed herself a smile. Nor I meeting you, Quentin Tanner. Dawn broke clear and crisp the next morning as they prepared to depart. Quinn had packed efficiently only what they could carry on horseback and what they absolutely needed for the journey. They would travel light and fast, avoiding main trails and settlements. Ready? Quinn asked as Nora secured the precious documents inside her jacket. She nodded, straightening her borrowed clothes pants and a shirt Quinn had altered to fit her better. Practical attire for the journey ahead, though she felt strange wearing them after a lifetime in dresses. "You look like you were born to ride the range," Quinn commented, a small smile playing at his lips. "My father would be scandalized," Nora replied, returning the smile despite her nerves. They set out just as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, Quinn leading the way down a barely visible trail. His knowledge of the terrain was impressive, navigating around obstacles, finding hidden passes, and selecting sheltered spots to rest. By midday, they had put several miles between themselves and the cabin, following a route that took them deeper into the wilderness before they would eventually turn toward Helena. As they stopped to water the horses at a small stream, Quinn surveyed the landscape with a practiced eye. "We're making good time," he observed. "Should reach the northern ridge by nightfall. There's a sheltered overhang where we can camp." Nora stretched, relieving the stiffness in her muscles from hours in the saddle. "How often have you made this journey to Helena?" "Only twice," Quinn admitted. "But I've hunted these mountains since I was a boy. Know them better than the back of my hand." As she watched him check his horse's shoes, Nora was struck by how much her perception of him had changed in the short time they'd known each other. What had begun as cautious gratitude toward a stranger had evolved into something deeper: respect for his quiet competence, admiration for his principles, and a growing affection she could no longer deny. "What?" Quinn asked, noticing her gaze. "Just thinking how fortunate I was that you were the one who found me that day," she replied honestly. Something flickered in his eyes: surprise, perhaps, or pleasure at her words. "I think we both got lucky that day." They continued their journey as afternoon shadows lengthened across the landscape. The terrain grew more challenging, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses up steep inclines. Quinn offered Nora his hand at particularly difficult stretches, his grip strong and reassuring. By evening, they reached the ridge Quinn had mentioned, a natural formation of rock that created a shallow cave-like shelter. As Quinn gathered wood for a small, smokeless fire, Nora arranged their bedrolls in the protected space. "We can have a hot meal tonight," Quinn said, "but once we're closer to settled areas, we'll need to be more careful about fires." They ate a simple supper of beans and jerky, speaking little but comfortable in their shared silence. As darkness fell completely, the vast expanse of stars emerged overhead, brighter than Nora had ever seen them in. "It's beautiful," she said, gazing upward. Quinn nodded, following her gaze. "Out here you can see how small we really are. Puts troubles in perspective sometimes." "Does it?" Nora asked. "My troubles feel rather large at the moment." "Fair point," he conceded with a slight smile. "Maybe it's more accurate to say the stars remind me that troubles pass. Nothing lasts forever, not even Judge Wallace's power." Nora drew her blanket closer around her shoulders against the night chill. "My father used to say that justice is slow but inevitable. I want to believe that's true." "It is," Quinn said with conviction. "But sometimes justice needs a helping hand. That's what we're doing, helping it along." As the fire burned down to embers, they settled into their bedrolls, positioned close together for warmth within the shelter of the overhang. Despite her exhaustion, Nora found sleep elusive, her mind racing with thoughts of the journey ahead and the man lying a few feet away. "Quinn," she whispered, uncertain if he was still awake. Came his drowsy response. Thank you for everything. In the darkness, she felt rather than saw him turn toward her. You don't need to keep thanking me, Nora. I know, but I want to. She paused, gathering courage. Before all this, I'd started to believe there weren't good men left in the world. After my father died, every hand extended to me came with conditions attached. Quinn was silent for a moment. I'm sorry that was your experience. Not all men are like Wallace. I know that now, she said softly. The night air carried his reply, barely audible. I'm glad. Morning came too soon, the first light of dawn rousing them from sleep. They ate a cold breakfast, packed quickly, and were on their way as the sun crested the horizon. The second day's travel took them through denser forest, the path occasionally so faint that only Quinn's experienced eye could follow it. We'll cut northwest here, he explained as they paused at a fork in the trail. Longer route but avoids Copper Creek. Wallace has mining interests there. Nora nodded, trusting his judgment. As they rode, Quinn pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his years in the territory, hunting expeditions with his father, encounters with wildlife, the harsh winter of '68 that nearly claimed his life. How did you survive? Nora asked after he described being caught in a sudden blizzard miles from home. Dumb luck and a sturdy horse, Quinn replied with a self-deprecating smile. And a Blackfoot hunter who found me half frozen and brought me to his camp. Taught me more about surviving in these mountains in 2 weeks than I'd learned in years. You've lived an interesting life, Quentin Tanner, he shrugged. Just a rancher trying to get by. No, Nora shook her head. You're more than that. Most men would have ridden past a wounded stranger or turned me in for the reward. Quinn was quiet for a moment. Maybe I just recognized something in you that day, something worth protecting. Their eyes met briefly before he urged his horse forward, leaving Nora to wonder what exactly he had seen in her that inspired such loyalty. The day progressed without incident until mid-afternoon, when Quinn suddenly raised his hand in a signal to stop. He dismounted quickly, motioning for Nora to do the same, and led their horses behind a cluster of boulders. What is it? Nora whispered, heart racing. Riders, Quinn murmured, eyes scanning the valley below, 3 of them following the main trail. Crouching beside him, Nora could just make out the distant figures, men on horseback moving at a deliberate pace, stopping occasionally as if searching for something. Wallace's men, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Quinn nodded grimly. Likely. They're heading in the direction of my cabin. Someone must have talked, maybe that trapper saw more than I thought. What do we do? Stay out of sight, let them pass. Quinn's expression was resolute. They'll find the mining cabin empty and have to double back. That gives us time to push ahead, maybe gain enough distance that they lose our trail completely. For nearly an hour, they remained hidden as the riders below methodically made their way along the trail. When they finally disappeared from view, Quinn signaled it was safe to continue, but altered their route to provide even more distance between them and their pursuers. We'll travel until dark, he decided. Make up as much ground as we can. The rest of the day passed in tense vigilance, both scanning the horizon regularly for signs of pursuit. By nightfall, they had covered impressive distance, but were exhausted. Finding a dense stand of pines for cover, they made camp without a fire, eating cold rations and speaking in hushed tones. We should reach the river crossing tomorrow, Quinn said as they spread their bedrolls beneath the trees. Once across, we'll be in different territory. Wallace's influence doesn't extend as far there. Nora nodded, but worry still creased her brow. They won't give up easily. Not with what's at stake. No, Quinn agreed. But neither will we. The night was colder than the previous one, and without a fire, the chills seeped through their blankets. Nora shivered despite her layers of clothing, trying not to let her teeth chatter. After several minutes, Quinn's voice came through the darkness. "This isn't working. We'll both freeze and be useless tomorrow." There was a rustling sound as he moved his bedroll next to hers. "Body heat," he explained simply, "if you're comfortable with it." Nora hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, that's sensible." Quinn positioned himself behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance while still close enough to share warmth. At first, Nora held herself rigid, but as his steady breathing and the heat from his body began to thaw her frozen limbs, she gradually relaxed. "Better?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "Yes," she admitted. "Much better." Neither mentioned the arrangement the next morning as they rose with first light and continued their journey. The day brought them to the river Quinn had spoken of, wide and swift, flowing from recent mountain runoff. "We'll cross here," he said, leading her to a section where the water ran shallower over a rocky bed. "Stay close to me. The current is stronger than it looks." The crossing was treacherous, the horses struggling against the force of the water. Halfway across, Nora's mount stumbled on a submerged boulder, nearly throwing her into the rushing current. Quinn's hand shot out, catching her arm and steadying her until the horse regained its footing. "Hold tight," he called over the roar of the water. "Almost there." When they finally reached the opposite bank, both were drenched but safe. Quinn immediately began gathering wood for a fire, knowing they needed to dry out before continuing. "Can we risk it?" Nora asked, gesturing to the smoke a fire would create. "Have to," Quinn replied. "Wet clothes in this climate invite pneumonia. Besides, we've put good distance between us and those riders." As they dried their clothes and warmed themselves by the small fire, Nora found herself studying Quinn's profile. The journey had worn on him. His face was leaner, stubble now a short beard, eyes alert but tired. Yet he maintained a quiet strength that gave her confidence. "How much further to Helena?" she asked. "4 days, maybe 5 with our detours." Quinn handed her a cup of hot coffee. "We're making good time, all things considered." Nora sipped the bitter brew gratefully. "And your friend there, Hollister, you're certain he'll help us reach the governor?" "As certain as I can be about anything these days," Quinn answered honestly. "James owes my father his life. That kind of debt doesn't fade. And if he can't help," Quinn met her gaze steadily, "then we find another way. Those documents reach the governor one way or another." His determination bolstered her own, and Nora nodded. "One way or another," she agreed. They continued their journey through increasingly varied terrain, forests giving way to rolling hills, then back to rugged mountain passes. Quinn's knowledge of the land proved invaluable, finding game trails and shortcuts that kept them moving forward while avoiding main roads. On the 4th day after crossing the river, as they made camp in a sheltered meadow, Quinn announced they were now less than 2 days from Helena. The news should have been cause for celebration, but instead brought a strange melancholy to Nora. Soon their journey would end, and with it, this unexpected partnership that had come to mean so much to her. "What will you do after?" Quinn asked that evening, seeming to sense her thoughts as they sat before their small fire. "Once Wallace is exposed," Nora poked at the embers with a stick. "I hadn't thought that far ahead. Clear my name, certainly. Beyond that," she shrugged. "Perhaps return to but settle my father's affairs properly." "Is there anything left for you there?" The question was gentle but direct. Nora considered it honestly. "Memories," she said finally. "But little else. My father's house was seized after his death. Our friends turned their backs when Wallace made his accusations." Quinn nodded slowly. "What about elsewhere? A fresh start, perhaps?" Nora looked up at him. "What about you? Will you simply return to your ranch as if none of this happened?" Something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or a question he wasn't ready to voice. "I don't think anything will be simple after this, for either of us." The following day brought clear skies and easier terrain as they descended toward the valleys surrounding Helena. They traveled in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them in the territorial capital and beyond. As they stopped to water the horses at a small creek around midday, the crack of a rifle shot shattered the peace. The bullet struck a tree inches from Nora's head, showering her with bark and splinters. "Down!" Quinn shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind a large boulder as a second shot rang out. Heart pounding, Nora pressed herself against the rock as Quinn drew his revolver. "Where are they?" she gasped. "Ridge to the south," Quinn replied tersely, peering cautiously around the boulder. "At least two of them. Must have cut across country to get ahead of us." Another shot struck their shelter, sending rock fragments flying. Their horses, spooked by the gunfire, had bolted several yards away but remained within sight, dancing nervously. "We need to move," Quinn said, checking his ammunition. "This position is too exposed." "To where?" Nora asked, scanning the open ground between them and the nearest cover, a stand of trees some 50 yards distant. Quinn's face was grim. "I'll draw their fire. When they're focused on me, you make for those trees." "No," Nora protested immediately. "I won't leave you exposed." "Not negotiable," Quinn said firmly. "Those documents need to reach Helena. That's the priority." "You're the priority," Nora insisted, surprising herself with the fierceness of her words. Quinn's expression softened momentarily. "Nora," his words were cut short as a third shot struck dangerously close, followed by the sound of men's voices calling to each other as they began to move down the ridge toward their position. "No time to argue," Quinn said. "On my signal, run for the trees. I'll be right behind you." Before she could protest further, Quinn fired 3 quick shots toward the ridge, then shouted. "Now!" Nora hesitated only a fraction of a second before sprinting toward the tree line, expecting at any moment to feel the impact of a bullet. Behind her, Quinn continued firing, forcing their attackers to take cover. She reached the trees and turned back to see Quinn making his own dash toward her position. He was halfway to safety when a shot rang out and he stumbled, clutching his arm, but kept moving. Nora raised her own revolver and fired toward the ridge, providing what cover she could until Quinn reached her side. "You're hit," she said anxiously, seeing blood seeping between his fingers where he gripped his upper arm. "Just grazed," Quinn assured her through gritted teeth. "We need to keep moving. They'll be coming down after us." They hurried deeper into the forest, Quinn whistling sharply for the horses. Miraculously, his mount responded, trotting toward them with Nora's horse following. They mounted quickly and rode hard, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and their pursuers. Only when they reached a densely wooded ravine several miles away did Quinn finally allow them to stop. His face was pale, his shirt sleeve soaked with blood. "Let me see," Nora insisted, helping him dismount and sit against a tree. The bullet had torn through the flesh of his upper arm, painful but not life-threatening. Nora tore strips from her petticoat to bind the wound, working quickly and efficiently. "You've done this before," Quinn observed, watching her skilled movements. "My father believed in practical education," Nora replied, tying off the bandage. "Basic medicine was part of it." "Smart man," Quinn said with a weak smile. "Yes, he was." Nora sat back on her heels, examining her handiwork. "The bleeding's slowing, but you've lost blood. We need to rest." Quinn shook his head. "Not safe. Those men know this area too. We push on to Helena." "You're in no condition. I've ridden with worse," he interrupted. "We're too close to stop now." Nora wanted to argue but recognized the determination in his eyes. At least let me take the lead. You focus on staying in the saddle. To her surprise, Quinn nodded. Fair enough. They traveled more cautiously now, Nora setting the pace while constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of pursuit. Quinn directed her with occasional quiet instructions, but mostly rode in silence, his jaw tight with pain. By nightfall, they had covered another 15 miles and Quinn's condition had deteriorated. His face was ashen, his body swaying slightly in the saddle. When they finally stopped to make camp in a protected hollow, he nearly fell from his horse. That's it, Nora said firmly, helping him to sit against a fallen log. We're resting properly and I'm redressing that wound. This time, Quinn didn't argue. When Nora removed the blood-soaked bandage, she found the wound angry and hot to the touch. Infection was setting in. We need to clean this thoroughly, she said, trying to keep the worry from her voice. Using water from their canteens and the last of Quinn's whiskey as a disinfectant, Nora cleaned the wound as gently as possible. Quinn remained stoically silent throughout the painful process, but his face was slick with sweat by the time she finished. Thank you, he said hoarsely as she wrapped fresh bandages around his arm. Nora met his gaze, no longer hiding her concern. You need a doctor, Quinn. Helena, he insisted. We're less than a day's ride now, I can make it. Nora wanted to believe him, but fear clawed at her heart. And if those men are still pursuing us, then we face them. Quinn's good hand found hers. Together. The simple touch sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the small fire she'd managed to build. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, all the unspoken words between them hanging in the night air. You should rest, Nora said finally, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. I'll take first watch. Despite his protests, Quinn was asleep within minutes, exhaustion and blood loss taking their toll. Nora sat beside him, rifle across her lap, listening to the night sounds of the forest and monitoring his breathing. Don't you dare die on me, Quentin Tanner, she whispered. Not now. The night passed without incident, and by dawn, Quinn's fever had broken. Though still weak, he insisted he was well enough to travel the final stretch to Helena. They set out as the sun rose, moving at a steady pace through increasingly settled country. By mid-afternoon, they crested a rise and saw Helena spread before them in the valley below a bustling territorial capital, with its mix of substantial government buildings and the rough-hewn structures typical of western towns. We made it, Nora breathed, relief washing over her. Quinn nodded, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. Now comes the tricky part. They approached the town cautiously, aware that word of their coming might have preceded them. Quinn directed Nora to a modest boarding house on the outskirts, run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson who, he assured her, was discreet and trustworthy. We need a room, Quinn told the gray-haired proprietress when she answered the door. And discretion. Mrs. Patterson took in Quinn's condition and Nora's travel-worn appearance with a shrewd gaze but asked no questions. $2 a night, meals included. Back room has its own entrance. Once settled in the simple but clean room, Quinn sat heavily on the edge of the bed. I need to find James Hollister. He'll be at the territorial offices this time of day. You're not going anywhere, Nora said firmly. You can barely stand. Tell me where to find him and I'll go. Too dangerous, Quinn argued. Wallace might have men watching the government buildings. And you're in no condition to outrun them if they are there, Nora countered. I can be inconspicuous in ways you can't right now. Their standoff was interrupted by a knock at the door. Both tensed, Quinn reaching for his revolver despite his injury. Nora approached the door cautiously. Who is it? She called. Mrs. Patterson, came the reply. I've brought hot water and bandages, and information if you're interested." Nora exchanged a glance with Quinn, who nodded slightly. She opened the door to admit the landlady, who carried a steaming basin and clean linens. "Bullet wound needs proper tending," Mrs. Patterson said matter-of-factly, setting down her supplies. "And you look like folks who might want to know that the governor's having a public reception tonight at the territorial offices, open to all citizens with concerns to present." Quinn straightened, wincing at the movement. "How did you?" Mrs. Patterson cut him off with a raised hand. "Been running this house for 15 years. No trouble when I see it, and no honest trouble from the other kind." Her sharp eyes assessed them. "You have the look of the former." "Thank you," Nora said sincerely. The older woman nodded. "Clean him up and rest. Reception starts at 7. Governor's a fair man if you can get his ear directly." With that, she left them alone again. "Well," Quinn said with a faint smile, "that solves one problem." "And creates others," Nora replied, already moving to help him remove his shirt so she could properly dress his wound. "A public reception means anyone could be there, including Wallace's men." "True," Quinn acknowledged, grimacing as she carefully cleaned the injury. "But also means security. The governor will have territorial marshals present." As Nora worked, they developed their plan. They would attend the reception to gather safety in numbers, and seek a private moment with the governor to present the documents and their case against Judge Wallace. "We'll need suitable attire," Nora pointed out. "We can hardly appear before the governor looking like outlaws." Quinn managed a chuckle. Mrs. Patterson might have suggestions for that too. Indeed, when consulted, their landlady proved remarkably resourceful. By late afternoon, she had procured a modest but presentable dress for Nora and a clean suit for Quinn, slightly large but serviceable. "Belonged to my late husband," Mrs. Patterson explained, handing Quinn the dark jacket and trousers. "Been saving them, but seems you need them more than my memories do." As evening approached, Nora helped Quinn dress, her fingers lingering slightly as she adjusted his collar. The simple domestic act felt strangely intimate after days of danger and flight. "You clean up well, Mr. Tanner," she said softly, smoothing the jacket across his shoulders. "As do you, Miss Davenport," he replied, his gaze taking in her transformation from trail-worn traveler to respectable lady. The borrowed dress was a deep blue that complemented her eyes, her hair arranged simply but neatly. For a moment they stood close, the air between them charged with words unsaid. "Quinn," Nora began hesitantly, "if tonight goes well when it goes well," he corrected gently. She smiled at his optimism. "When it goes well, things will change quickly." "I just want you to know," again she faltered, unsure how to express the tangle of emotions that had grown within her during their journey together. Quinn reached up, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek. "I know," he said simply. "Me too." The territorial offices were ablaze with light when they arrived, citizens of all stations filing in to meet their governor. Quinn kept Nora's hand firmly tucked in the crook of his good arm as they navigated the crowded reception room, both scanning faces for potential threats. "There," Quinn murmured, nodding toward a tall, bearded man near a side door. "That's James Hollister." They made their way through the crowd, Quinn positioning himself to catch his father's old friend's eye. When Hollister spotted them, his expression registered first surprise, then concern as he noted Quinn's condition. "Quentin Tanner," he said as they approached, clasping Quinn's hand warmly. "It's been years, and you look like you've seen better days." "James," Quinn greeted him. "We need to speak with the governor, privately. It's urgent." Hollister's bushy eyebrows rose, but he asked no immediate questions. "The governor's time is limited tonight." "What's this regarding, Judge Wallace of Butte?" Nora said quietly. and evidence of corruption that got my father killed." Recognition flickered in Hollister's eyes. "You'd be Harold Davenport's daughter, then, the one they're saying murdered him." "The very same," Nora confirmed steadily, "with proof that tells a different story." Hollister studied them both for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "Wait here. I'll see what I can arrange." As they stood anxiously waiting for Hollister's return, Nora suddenly stiffened beside Quinn. "Don't turn around," she whispered, "but one of Wallace's deputies just entered. Marcus Flynn." Quinn felt her trembling slightly against him and tightened his hold on her hand. "Stay calm. We're almost there." Minutes that felt like hours passed before Hollister returned. "The governor will see you briefly in his private office. Follow me quickly." As they moved toward a hallway at the rear of the reception room, Nora glanced back and saw Flynn scanning the crowd, his hand resting ominously near his holstered revolver. Hollister led them through a door into a wood-paneled office where a distinguished man in his 50s sat behind a large desk. Governor Benjamin Franklin Potts was known as a no-nonsense administrator with a strong sense of justice, exactly the ally they needed. "Governor," Hollister said, "may I present Quentin Tanner and Miss Nora Davenport?" "Mr. Tanner, Miss Davenport," the governor acknowledged with a nod. "James says you have a matter of some urgency. You have 5 minutes to convince me it warrants interrupting this reception." Quinn deferred to Nora, who stepped forward and withdrew the precious documents from inside her dress. "Governor Potts," she began with remarkable composure, "these ledgers contain evidence that Judge Horace Wallace of Butte has been embezzling funds from mining investors for the past 3 years. My father discovered the discrepancies while working as an accountant for the companies involved." She placed the documents on his desk. "When my father confronted Wallace privately, he was murdered the next day. Wallace then accused me of the crime to discredit these findings and has been hunting me ever since." The governor's expression remained impassive as he opened the ledgers, scanning the columns of figures and notations. "These are serious accusations, Miss Davenport." "Yes, sir," she agreed. "And they've already cost my father his life and nearly cost us ours. Wallace's men have been pursuing us for days." At that moment, a commotion erupted in the outer hallway, raised voices, and the sound of a struggle. Quinn moved instinctively to position himself between Nora and the door. Governor Potts rose from his desk, his face hardening. "James!" Hollister was already moving toward the door when it burst open. Marcus Flynn stood in the doorway, revolver drawn, another man behind him. "Governor Potts," Flynn said, ignoring Hollister's attempt to block his entry, "I must insist you turn these fugitives over to me. I have a warrant for the woman's arrest from Judge Wallace himself." For a terrible moment, Nora feared all was lost, that the governor would defer to the legal document Flynn surely carried. Quinn's hand found hers, squeezing gently in silent support. "Deputy Flynn, isn't it?" Governor Potts said calmly, coming around his desk. "I'm aware of Judge Wallace's warrant. I'm also now in possession of evidence suggesting that warrant was issued under false pretenses." Flynn's eyes flickered to the ledgers on the desk. "Those documents were stolen, were they?" the governor interrupted. "Or were they preserved as evidence of a crime?" "That's something the territorial court will need to determine." He turned to Hollister. "James, please summon Marshal Braddock. I believe we need to place Judge Wallace's documents into official custody while we investigate these allegations." Relief washed over Nora as she realized the governor believed them, or at least took their claims seriously enough to investigate. Flynn's face darkened with anger. "Governor, you can't." "I can and I will," Potts said firmly. "Lower your weapon, deputy, or I'll have you arrested for threatening violence in a government office." For a tense moment, it seemed Flynn might refuse. Then, with obvious reluctance, he holstered his revolver. "Judge Wallace will hear about this." "I'm counting on it," the governor replied. "In fact, I'll be sending for him personally." As Hollister escorted the fuming deputy from the room, Governor Potts turned back to Quinn and Nora. "It seems your 5 minutes have been well spent, Miss Davenport. I'll need formal statements from both of you, and you'll need to remain in Helena until this matter is resolved." "We understand, sir," Quinn answered. "Thank you." The governor studied them thoughtfully. "You've taken considerable risk bringing this to light. Wallace has powerful friends." "So did my father," Nora said quietly. "He believed justice would prevail even against powerful men." Potts nodded, something like approval in his eyes. "A belief I share, Miss Davenport. Now I suggest you both find secure accommodation. The territorial marshal will contact you tomorrow to take your formal statements." As they left the governor's office, Nora felt lightheaded with relief. Quinn's arm slipped around her waist, supporting her as they made their way through a side exit to avoid the main reception room where Flynn might still be lurking. "We did it," she whispered, scarcely believing their ordeal might finally be ending. "You did it," Quinn corrected. "Your courage brought us here." The night air was cool as they stepped outside, stars bright overhead in the clear Montana sky. For the first time in years, Nora felt something like peace settle over her, the weight of her father's death not gone, but somehow lighter with the promise of justice on the horizon. They returned to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, where their landlady received the news of their successful meeting with satisfied nods. "Never doubted you had right on your side," she declared, bringing them a late supper in their room. "Now eat and rest. Sounds like tomorrow will bring its own challenges." When they were alone again, the adrenaline of the evening began to fade, leaving Nora suddenly exhausted. Quinn looked equally spent, his injured arm clearly paining him despite his attempts to hide his discomfort. "You should sleep," Nora told him, gesturing to the bed. "I can make a pallet on the floor." Quinn shook his head. "I'll take the floor, you take the bed." Their familiar argument about sleeping arrangements brought a smile to Nora's lips, a moment of normalcy amid extraordinary circumstances. "We could compromise," she suggested hesitantly. "The bed is large enough for both if we're careful of your arm." Quinn's eyes met hers, searching for certainty. "If you're comfortable with that." "I am," she said simply. And she was, she realized. Somewhere along their journey, Quentin Tanner had become the person she trusted most in the world. They settled side by side on the bed, a respectful distance between them, but close enough to share warmth in the cooling night. Exhaustion quickly overtook them both, but as sleep claimed her, Nora felt Quinn's hand find hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining naturally, as if they'd always belonged together. The following days passed in a whirlwind of official statements, meetings with the territorial marshal, and careful planning. Governor Potts moved swiftly, sending marshals to Butte with orders to secure Judge Wallace's records and bring the judge himself to Helena for questioning. Word came 3 days later that Wallace had attempted to flee, but was apprehended at the Idaho border. With him captured, and the evidence from Nora's documents corroborated by records seized from his office, the case against him solidified rapidly. Nora's name was officially cleared of all charges, and the governor issued a public statement acknowledging Harold Davenport's murder as an act of corruption that would be fully prosecuted. Through it all, Quinn remained at Nora's side, his steady presence a constant comfort. His wound was properly treated by a Helena doctor and began to heal cleanly. They continued to share Mrs. Patterson's back room, their growing closeness tacitly accepted by their perceptive landlady. 1 week after their arrival in Helena, as they walked together along a quiet street at dusk, Quinn finally broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "The marshal says they won't need us for Wallace's trial for at least a month," he said. "Time for proper preparations." Nora nodded. "Governor Potts assured me justice will be served regardless." Quinn stopped walking, turning to face her. "So what now, Nora? What comes next for you?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Nora looked up at him, this man who had risked everything for her when she'd been a stranger, who had become so much more in the weeks since. "I've been thinking about that," she admitted. "But holds nothing for me now but painful memories." "And elsewhere?" Quinn asked, echoing their conversation from days before. Nora took a deep breath. "I was thinking about Montana's ranching country. I hear it's beautiful if one has the right guide." Hope flickered in Quinn's eyes. "It is beautiful, challenging too, not an easy life." "I've never sought an easy life," Nora replied softly. "Just a meaningful one, with people worth caring about." Quinn reached for her hand, his rough palm warm against hers. "I have a ranch that needs work, land with potential. It's a lot to take on." "Are you warning me away, Quentin Tanner?" Nora asked, a smile playing at her lips. "No," he said seriously. "I'm being honest about what I can offer. It's not much compared to what you deserve." Nora stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth of his body. "What I deserve is a choice, a chance to build something new. Someone who sees me as I am and values that." Quinn's free hand rose to cup her cheek. "I see you, Nora Davenport. Have from the first moment by that creek, strong, brave, determined, beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with appearance." "And what do you want, Quinn?" she asked, her heart pounding. "A partner," he answered without hesitation. "Someone to share the work and the rewards, the good days and the hard ones." His voice softened. "Someone to love and be loved by if I'm fortunate enough." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes. "I think we might both be fortunate then." In the fading light of the Montana evening, Quinn lowered his head and kissed her gently, a promise of all that might come if they were brave enough to reach for it together. 3 weeks later, they stood hand in hand before a justice of the peace in Helena, exchanging vows as simple and honest as their feelings for each other. Mrs. Patterson attended as witness, beaming approval, along with James Hollister and his wife. The following day, they began the journey back to Quinn's ranch, no longer running from danger but riding toward a future they would build together. The summer was waning, hints of autumn touching the landscape as they traveled north and west through the territory. "Almost home," Quinn said on the third day, as they crested a ridge overlooking a valley bisected by a clear, winding stream. Below, nestled against the base of pine-covered hills, stood the cabin where their story had begun. Nora took in the view, the modest cabin, the small herd of cattle grazing in the distance, the mountains rising majestically behind it all. "It's beautiful, Quinn." As they rode down into the valley, Nora felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This land, so different from Butt's crowded streets and constant noise of mining operations, called to something deep within her, a desire for open spaces and honest work, for peace after years of struggle. Quinn helped her dismount when they reached the cabin, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms despite his still healing wound. "Quinn," she protested, laughing. "Your arm is strong enough to carry my wife over our threshold," he insisted, carrying her up the steps and through the door. Inside, the cabin was just as Nora remembered, simple but well built, with the same solid table and chairs, the stone fireplace, the bed now made up with fresh linens Mrs. Patterson had insisted on giving them as a wedding gift. Quinn set her down gently in the center of the room, his expression suddenly uncertain. "It's not much. We can expand it in time." Add rooms as needed. Nora turned slowly, taking in what was now her home. It's perfect, Quinn. We'll make it ours together. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of the cabin, Nora rested her head on Quinn's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I never thought I'd find this, she confessed. After Father died, I was so focused on survival, on justice. I never allowed myself to imagine a future beyond that. Quinn's fingers traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. And now I can see it, she said, smiling against his skin. Years unfolding here, the cabin growing, the land flourishing, children perhaps someday. His arm tightened around her. I'd like that, very much. The weeks became months as they settled into life together on the ranch. Nora proved herself a quick study in the tasks of ranch life, learning to ride better, to help with the cattle, to maintain the garden Quinn had started, but never had time to tend properly. He, in turn, built the additional room they'd spoken of, creating a proper kitchen where Nora could work more comfortably. Word came from Helena in late November that Judge Wallace had been convicted on multiple charges of corruption, embezzlement, and murder. He would spend the remainder of his life in prison. The news brought Nora a sense of closure, justice for her father at last. Winter descended on the mountains, blanketing the landscape in white and confining them often to the cabin. They passed the long evenings reading aloud from Quinn's small collection of books, planning improvements for the spring, and simply enjoying the gift of each other's company. It was during one such evening, as snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, that Nora shared her news. "Quinn," she said, setting aside her mending, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked up from the ledger where he'd been calculating their supplies for the remainder of winter, concern immediately crossing his features. "Is something wrong?" "No," she smiled, moving to kneel beside his chair. "Something is very right. I believe we'll be needing that additional bedroom sooner than we planned." Understanding dawned slowly in his eyes. "Nora, are you saying—" "Yes," she confirmed, taking his hand and placing it gently against her still flat stomach. "Come summer, there will be 3 of us here." The joy that spread across Quinn's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." Tears of happiness spilled down Nora's cheeks as she nodded. "Our family, Quinn, the one we're building together." Later that night, as Nora drifted toward sleep in the warmth of their bed, she felt Quinn's hand resting protectively over her abdomen. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For what?" she asked drowsily. "For trusting me that day by the creek. For being brave enough to let me help you." His voice caught slightly. "For making me the happiest man in Montana." Nora turned in his arms to face him, tracing the beloved contours of his face with her fingertips. "Do you know what I remember most from those early days? When I was at my lowest point, feeling like I was nothing but trouble to you, a burden you'd taken on." "What?" Quinn prompted gently. "You looked at me with such certainty and said, 'Then let me prove you're a blessing,' and you have, Quinn. Every day since, you've proven it." Quinn kissed her then, tenderly, reverently. "And you've been mine, Nora Tanner, the greatest blessing I never knew to ask for." Spring arrived with new life everywhere, wildflowers dotting the meadows, calves frolicking on strengthening legs, and Nora's body changing as their child grew within her. Quinn worked from sunrise to sunset, driven by the desire to prepare everything for their expanding family. By June, the 2nd bedroom was finished, a small cradle carved by Quinn's hands waiting for its future occupant. The garden flourished under Nora's care, promising abundant vegetables for the coming months. Life settled into a rhythm of shared work and shared joy, On a warm August evening, with the help of a midwife from the nearest settlement, Nora gave birth to a healthy son. They named him Harold Quinn Tanner, honoring both her father and the man who had given her a new life when all seemed lost. As Quinn placed their newborn son in her arms for the first time, Nora wept tears of joy and gratitude. "He's perfect," Quinn whispered, his own eyes damp as he gazed at his wife and child. "He is," Nora agreed, counting tiny fingers and toes in wonder, "and he's ours." Quinn settled beside them on the bed, his arm encircling them both. "Our family," he said softly. "Everything I never knew I needed until I found you." Nora leaned against his shoulder, exhausted but filled with a happiness so complete it seemed almost too much to contain. "Do you remember what you told me that night by the fire when I was afraid to trust anyone?" Quinn smiled, recalling the moment clearly. "I said I'd never turn away someone in need, that my father taught me that. And now our son will learn the same," Nora said, looking down at the sleeping infant. "Along with all the other things that matter: courage, honesty, kindness. Everything you've shown me." "Everything we'll show him together," Quinn corrected gently. Outside their window, the Montana sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, a fitting backdrop to the new chapter unfolding within the cabin walls. From tragedy had come triumph, from loss, renewal, from two wounded souls traveling dangerous paths, a family bound by love and the promise of all the years to come. As darkness settled over the land, Nora Tanner held her husband's hand and watched their son sleep, secure in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest blessings arrive in the moments we least expect them, and that love, once found, can transform even the darkest journey into a homecoming.